the School of Education, and supported by CAS and Academic Affairs, and with extraordinary help from Brianna Tauber, the EvoS assistant, who contributed quite a bit in making this happen. We are very fortunate to have Scott Barry Kaufman join us from New York City today. Scott has lots of accolades, and I will only mention some of them so as to not eat into all of his time. But I don't want to forget to mention that he just officially found out, and this is the first time this is going to be announced publicly, that he has been appointed as the Science Director for the Imagination Institute at the University of Pennsylvania. Everyone clap for Scott. So Scott's got an awesome full-time position lined up. He has a PhD from Yale in cognitive psychology, and he specifically worked with his dissertation research with Robert Sternberg. Sternberg is perhaps the most published living academic psychologist, or close to it, and Scott was his final PhD student, in fact. And Scott wrote an extraordinary 400-plus page dissertation based on that work. He also has a master's degree from Cambridge University, happens to be where, that's right, where Charles Darwin went to school. He's got a BA from Carnegie Mellon with a major in psychology and music. He has written and edited several books, including the Cambridge Handbook of Intelligence. And he also, I was fortunate to collaborate with him on a book that we titled Mating Intelligence Unleashed, which came out last year. And so I've known Scott for a long time, and it's been a lot of fun collaborating with him. He has just made an awesome impact in the field of psychology. When I first met Scott, he's probably the only PhD student I know at the time. When I said, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? He said, I want to be a popular psychologist. I want to take psychology and bring it to the masses. And I'm like, oh my God, PhD students aren't allowed to say that. You have to say, I want to do research, and I want to do nothing but research. And that's the only allowable answer. But I met Scott early on. He's like, no, I really want to do this. I really want to popularize these ideas, have them actually have a positive impact on people, which I think has been exactly what he's done, and he's done a great job of it. He was recently asked to be part of a panel on the nature of genius at the 92nd Y. So he's an expert on genius, which sounds pretty smart, I think. He was asked to give a TEDx talk recently, and the content he'll be talking about now is related to the TED talk that he gave, which is about the nature of education and testing in the modern U.S. and things that we might want to do differently. His work has been covered extensively in the Huffington Post, the New York Times, Psychology Today, Nature, Chronicle of Higher Education, Scientific American Mind extensively, and more. In fact, the current issue of Psychology Today has an article titled Daydreams, right? That's what? And he's the author of that article. And he signed, if we could see with the camera right there, to New Paltz, with love, Scott Barry Kaufman. So New Paltz has its own signed copy of that. A couple other things about Scott. I've gotten to know him pretty well, and we have a lot of fun together. He's a very nice guy to hang out with. A couple things beyond his academic work. He tried out for American Idol twice. He was part of a breakdancing club in the United Kingdom. This is true. He played basketball with Kobe Bryant, right? His thoughts on education and testing have proven highly influential, and his new position at the University of Pennsylvania, I think, establishes his credibility in the field as an extraordinary emergent scholar. And I decided to not show a lot of embarrassing pictures of him, so I figured I would just show this one. He is also friends with Dr. Ruth. That is a real picture of Scott and Dr. Ruth. But he has done a great job in bringing psychology to the masses, and we'll be talking about his work titled From Evaluation to Inspiration. Please join me in welcoming Scott Barry Kaufman.
Thank you, Glenn. I honestly think that was the best introduction anyone's ever. Thank you. It's always very like, thank you, by the way, for inviting me and for coming. Both of those things. I appreciate that. Today I'm going to be giving a talk called From Evaluation to Inspiration. Raise your hand if you know who Steve Carell is, the comedian. He was on the Jay Leno show a couple years ago, and Jay Leno asked him, he's like, how are your children doing? And he said, you know, I hate it when people talk about kids on talk shows. I hate it because every person who talks about their kids are obviously the most intelligent and the cutest. They're all very, very gifted children. Ask me about my kids. They're all right. Are they the cutest? Meh, they'll get by. I mean, they're not going to freak anyone out. In terms of intellect, it's like, you know, they're not going to be at the back of the class, not going to be at the front of the class. They'll be in the middle kind of looking out the window. They'll get by. You know, you don't hear that sort of response that often in education circles. It's very weird to hear this kind of introduction from Glenn because as a kid growing up, I could have been Steve Carell's kid without a doubt. This is a picture of me from my, that is what my hair looked like when I was about 4 or 5 years old. For the first 3 years of my life, I had about 21 ear infections, and it was very hard for me to process information in real time. And they, you know, I would appear in the classroom as completely zoned out or tuned out, and they put me in special education. They asked me to repeat third grade. I remember vividly that extra third grade, the second third grade, I was bullied all the time. Here's a picture of me being bullied by another kid who was also in special education with me and had to repeat third grade. I don't know why he was angry at me. We're both in the same situation, but I remember being bullied a lot, and I kind of kept retreating into my own inner world. I think like every year that went by after third grade, you know, I sort of retreated further and further away from school, and I would come home and I would do a lot of things that were, I guess you could call creative. You know, I would write stories, and I would come up with like soap opera plot lines in my head and things as like the leading man, you know, at age 10 in my head, which is, I guess, a little weird. But I did lots of these things, and I just completely ignored what was going on in the classroom, and they kept me in special education. So it just verified to everyone. It just continued to verify my situation. I was kept in special education till 9th grade. Hi, Alice. Oh my gosh, you're right there. That's crazy. Thanks for coming. Oh my gosh. I didn't know you were going to be here. Okay, so I was kept in special education all the way up until 9th grade. And I remember I was there and I was taking an untimed test. So they made a lot of kids in special education. I don't know if anyone in this room was in special education, but you know, they made it go through this process. It's actually quite humiliating. You'd be in the regular classroom, and they would make you, when it was test time, they'd make you remove you from the classroom, go to a special room to take a test untimed. And I felt so humiliated by this. I remember one day there was a special education teacher who I'd never seen before. She was covering for the regular teacher, and she came in and she looked at me and she saw my clear frustration, and she came up to me and asked me, like, what are you doing here? And I realized I had no good answer to that question. And you know, and I ran to the payphone. I called my mom. I said, you know, like, what am I still doing in special education? And she said, we don't know. You know, like, you know, we just trust the experts. I said, you know what? I'd like to try to do something. You know, I'd like to try to show that I'm capable of doing something in this school. So I took myself out. They let me out on like a trial basis because they didn't know what to do with this. No one's ever like broken out of special education before, so they're like, oh, you know, we'll let you out on a trial basis, and we'll see if you can handle it. And I really pushed myself to see what my limits were for the first time because no one had ever really given me a chance before that. And I called my grandfather, asked my grandfather, who was a cellist in the Philadelphia Orchestra. I said, would you teach me how to play cello? He was retired by that point, and he was just thrilled to teach me, and I practiced 9 hours a day over that summer after I got out of special education. And I was determined to join the school orchestra in the start of the new school year without any labels. I felt like it was a fresh start. And I did. I joined the orchestra and beat out, even on the first seating test, beat out someone who's been playing many years. But I think she was on drugs when she was doing the seating test, so it probably doesn't count. But regardless, I beat her, and you know, in 2-3 years, eventually graduated, second cellist, won the All-Department Music Award, and, I wish I could say it was all clear sailing from there, and I'm going to tell you about an experience now that really cemented for me my interest in this topic and sort of what my life mission is today. From sophomore year to senior year of high school, I started getting straight A's. After I got out of special education, and I really started challenging myself, and I got excited, and I had an identity for the first time, and all my friends were in the gifted class. And I was like, you know what, guys? I want to join you guys. Before I know it's my senior year of high school, but before I get out of here, I want to be gifted, And I went to the school psychologist, and I asked him, is there any way I can join my friends? They play really cool, they do a lot of really cool stuff. And he pulled out, I'll never forget this, he pulled out a napkin. He looked at my files, first of all. He's like, sure, let me just look in the files. And he pulled out my IQ testing session from age 11. And he's like, okay, sit down, I want to tell you the news. And he pulled out a napkin, and he's like, he drew a bell curve. And he went all the way to the right of the bell curve. And he's like, so at the right here is gifted. And then he moved to the left a little bit. He's like, this is average. And then he moved to the left a little bit. He's like, these are the athletes. And then he moved to the left a little bit. He's like, I'm afraid that this is where you are. You're not gifted. And I was like, dude, at what point does my academic performance, my achievement matter more than my potential, right? So, he's looking at my potential from age 11, and here I am getting a Latin scholar, high school music awards, and he's still looking at my IQ score. And he said, intelligence, he said, giftedness is intelligence. Intelligence doesn't change. It doesn't matter what you do in school. It's your inborn intelligence. And it just didn't feel right to me, that sort of response. I ran to the library. I looked at a chart of what people are capable of achieving at my IQ score, and it clearly said in the textbook, not likely to graduate high school. And I was like, screw that. And I went right up to the gifted education teacher, and I said, look, I didn't officially make gifted education, but I really want to be given a chance. And she was so compassionate and kind, and she felt horrible about the situation. She's like, I hate these rules. She's like, I'll tell you what, I'm going to let you in as an undercover gifted student for 1 year. We won't tell anyone. We won't tell any of your friends that you're not really gifted, but I'm going to let you in. And I had a great year. All my friends think thought I was gifted up until a year ago when my book came out, and I came out of the closet for the first time. My friends were like, dude, you weren't there officially, but it was really eye-opening experience because I went through two different poles of the education system. I spent most of my early childhood in special education, and then I got a chance to be an undercover gifted student. I got a chance to sort of, and I noticed that even at both ends of the spectrum, none of the students were happy. No one was winning. There was something very wrong with the system, and sort of been on this quest the past 10, 15 years to scientifically understand what this all means. By the way, I was doing research for my book on gifted. I contacted that special education teacher who came in that day and asked me why I was still there. It turns out I never saw her again after that. It was only that one day because I got myself out. So she was only covering for the teacher. But with the help of the gifted teacher who let me in, she helped me track down this teacher, and I did meet with her. This is her. I tracked her down, wrote her an email, and she remembered me instantly. She's like, "Are you the black-haired kid that whatever?" And I was like, "Yes." She's like, "Okay, I didn't do that with many kids." She's like, I took a big risk doing that. I could have gotten in a lot of trouble, but she was so happy to see that I did something in my life, and I was really appreciative of that. So it really is amazing the power of what a teacher can do, or what someone who believes in you can do. So what I want to talk about today is how can we design an education system or use science to help us really bring out the best in kids and make sure that they stop falling between the cracks. That's what this picture is supposed to show. If you're wondering, what am I looking at? These are kids falling between cracks. How can we stop the kids falling between the cracks? I just did straight up Google images. Kids falling between cracks. First thing that came up, I'm not going to lie. This is what we got. But how can we stop that? This is the thing that I've been spending my whole career so far trying to understand. There's a great quote here by Henry Suzzallo. Does anyone know who Henry Suzzallo is? Does anyone know who Salieri is? Who's Salieri? A composer. So Henry Suzzallo is to John Dewey what Salieri is to Mozart. Okay, he wrote the foreword to John Dewey's book, and obviously today no one knows who he is. But you know who John Dewey is, I hope, yeah? Okay. So in his book, Interest and Effort in Education, one of my intellectual heroes, John Dewey, in the introduction, which is a terrific introduction, I'm trying to like bring Henry back, you know, like Henry's not here to speak for himself because this is from the turn of the 20th century, but I loved his introduction to this book. He said, somehow our teaching has not attracted children to the school and its work. Now this quote is from 1913. I want to ask you, do you think things have fundamentally, raise your hand if you think this quote still applies in 2014. And everywhere I go, no matter what country I go to, no matter who I'm talking to, almost everyone in the room, their hands go up. Clearly something is still not working. You know, 100 years later, people still feel the same exact way. Here's some pretty scary statistics, I think. In one of the largest surveys ever conducted on student engagement, 75% of students reported they were bored in class because the material was not interesting. 50% reported being bored every day of their lives. 40% felt the material was not relevant to their lives. 45% did not feel to be an important part of the school community. 22 disagreed or strongly disagreed that there was one adult in school who cared about them at all. 55% spent less than 1 hour reading or studying. Over 30%, so about 1 million of all ninth graders in the U.S. fail to graduate from high school. That's pretty scary, you know. Just 4 years later, you know, we'll fail to graduate high school. Between 40 to 60% of all students who remain in school, so the ones who don't decide not to drop out, the ones who remain, have been labeled by researchers as chronically disengaged through their responses to surveys. And a lot of people may think that a major reason why students drop out of school is because it's too hard. But it's not, doesn't seem to be the case. It turns out that about 1/3 of students who consider dropping out say they're bored because they aren't being challenged enough. Okay, tell the No Child Left Behind Act about this. You know, 1/3 of students are not feeling like they're being challenged enough. Here's a quote from George Lucas. Do you know who George Lucas is? More than you know who's Henry, whatever. I already forgot his last name. I'm joking. Poor Henry. Poor Henry. Quote, my own experience in public schools was quite frustrating. I was often bored. Occasionally I had a teacher who engaged me and made me curious and motivated to learn. I wondered why school can't be interesting all the time. I love this quote from him. So this is nothing new. You've heard of the factory model. This is still the dominant paradigm of education in this country, is the factory model. What's broken? So there's a lot broken. You know, I can give a whole talk just on that topic, but here are a couple things that's broken about this dominant paradigm that we still have left over from a different age, industrial age. It's still the same system. So one thing, the way we demotivate students, by such an emphasis on standards and standardized testing and external reasons to do well in school, we're systematically demotivating students from wanting to get up in the morning. We shouldn't be shocked that many students are disengaged from school when their primary objective to go to school is to perform well so that their country can compete in a global economy, you know, as opposed to what is the development or relevance for their own personal life. Also, the way we isolate students from the other students in the classroom, right? The way we isolate them from their own future. There's lots of ways we isolate them from their future identity, their future selves. You know, what is the relevance of this to the future? We isolate them from the larger community, right? So, and by the way, I'm just talking about there are lots of progressive schools out there, schools I've worked with, schools I've talked to who are trying to tackle some of these issues. But this still is the prominent, dominant paradigm in the United States. The way schools create a sense of powerlessness in students, right? So the whole hierarchy that they set up in the school system, basically what we've set up here today, you know, it's a bit awkward, but you know, where you have like the person lecturing, right? The person talking and everyone's just passively listening. It does create a sense of powerlessness. Now, I hope none of you feel a sense of powerlessness in this lecture, and I want you to feel free to raise your hand and talk at any time and tell me what you think. So I am offering that on the table. Okay, Alice is smiling back there. It comforts me to see Alice smile. Okay, and also emphasis on low IQ. Here, this is a little bit, probably my most controversial statement right here. But I would argue that a major thing that's broken in the education system is that when we refer students to school psychologists because a student is struggling in school, what's the first thing the school psychologist assumes is the cause of that? Low intelligence. That's how we're trained. That's how school psychologists are trained. It's like, oh, let's open up the whisk, you know, let's give them the battery and let's see, you know, let's see what's going on here. And I think that's actually getting in the way of bringing out of really getting at all of the causes, the multi-causal factors, structure, to sound all nerdy, of the situation about why students have low achievement. And I'm going to be talking a lot about today a lot of factors that I think are perhaps even more important than IQ. But first, let's talk a little bit about the IQ test. Raise your hand if you've heard of IQ. Okay, good start. Raise your hand if you've taken an IQ test before. Not online, not like the online one. And like most hands go down when I said that. Okay, so we've got some survivors back there. That's fine, and it's fine too if we have high IQ people in this room. That's fine with me, by the way. I'm not anti-IQ. But I want to talk a little about how do we measure intelligence? So IQ testing is still considered the major form, most important form of IQ testing. So if you sit down to take an IQ test battery, really what IQ is a summary statistic. It's a summary score of a bunch of intellectual functions, things from quick arithmetic to vocabulary to reading comprehension to spatial orientation, being able to mentally rotate things in your mind, things like that. So it's a whole wide range of things. And a competent school psychologist can come up with a sort of pattern, look at the patterns of strengths and weaknesses of these different items. They don't just look at the IQ number, right? In fact, most school psychologists de-emphasize that global IQ number and look at these sub-test scores. But this is how IQ is measured. It's like the physical fitness test. Has anyone taken a physical fitness test in high school? You know, this guy is like, yeah, I cleaned up on that one. Yeah, I could tell. But on the physical fitness test, you do lots of things, right? You got to I remember I beat Kobe Bryant in one physical fitness test. This is true. You're gonna love this. Because I won the school. Do you know the racer one? The racer, you put the eraser down there, and then you have to run and pick it up, and then you go back, and you go back. Yeah, I sucked at every of the other ones. I couldn't get one pull-up, or whatever, but I put all my energies into the eraser one, and I got the school record for that year, you know, for that one. Anyway, not bragging. But the point there, you know, if you looked at my global physical fitness functioning, that was never very good. Not very good. You would see a lot of scatter, right? But it's the same logic with IQ tests. So the global IQ score is just a summary of lots of these different kinds of cognitive hurdles that we put people through. But really, some of the most important information is gleaned by looking at those sub-test scores and looking to see what's called scatter, you know, between the different scores. So how much does IQ change? This is, it's been assumed for a lot of the 20th century by a lot of people that IQ doesn't change. That's a stable trait. And it is stable in its scientific terms, meaning that throughout the course of your lifespan, there's a correlation. So your relative standing on this test at one age will tend to remain same the rest of your life. That doesn't mean that through your own individual development through the course of your life that your IQ is not increasing. And it also doesn't mean that you can't radically change that rank. It's just a group correlation. But there are often lots of exceptions. My friend Kevin McGrew, who's an IQ test maker, he analyzed all the contemporary IQ test batteries to see how much can IQ change. And he found that and this is quite shocking find, many people don't realize this, he found a given person's IQ score can actually be expected to vary from 16 to 26 points depending on which test you take. So from one IQ test battery to another IQ test battery, he found a 16 to 26 point spread on average. Okay? A lot of people are not aware of this. Why does this matter? Somebody tell me why this matters. For any reason that it might matter. Why would this matter at all? Yeah. Or it can change. It might be right in that second, but it can change, yeah. Thank you. But lots of decisions are being made based on arbitrary cutoff scores, right? And assumptions that these tests are not fluctuating or developing or changing at all throughout the course of the lifespan. So keep this in mind, these numbers, as I go along. What about the relationship to academic achievement? So a lot of people have this assumption, as school psychologists, the reason why they look at IQ test batteries to see why is a student not performing well is because they assume that it's correlated with academic achievement. And they're right. It is significantly correlated at a statistical, scientific level. Between 40 to 50% of differences in academic achievement outcomes can be predicted by high IQ, by IQ scores. On average, the kid with a high IQ is probabilistically speaking more likely to do better in school than the kid with a lower IQ. That's true. But what does that mean about the individual you have sitting in front of you in that chair? You're trying to decide the course of their future. What does that mean for them? Well, the thing is, that also means that 50 to 60% of the differences are unaccounted for by IQ. So just because, let's not get too deterministic about this, because that means this point is not. You know what? I actually do want to. I told Glenn I wasn't going to highlight anything today. Maybe I should have used the other one. But anyway, just to emphasize, it does mean that about 50 to 60% of the differences are unaccounted for by IQ. This is an illustration I worked on with. Well, I didn't do this. So I worked with an illustrator on this, provide him with the data, and this is another analysis by Kevin McGrew. And this is just a regression line. It shows the correlation between IQ and academic achievement for a nationally representative sample. So this is basically everyone who took an IQ test, this Woodcock-Johnson IQ test, that's what it's called. And what does a regression line mean, right? So it just means that, sure, there's a correlation. So there's a significant correlation, maybe 0.4, right? But what is all that? What are all those dots? What are those dots? What does each dot represent? A human being. Awesome, awesome. A living, breathing human being. Let's not forget that for a moment, okay? Because what this means is that 50% of kids don't perform up to what they're expected to based on their IQ score. But it also means, and this is also not highlighted, 50% far exceed what they're expected to achieve based on their IQ score, okay? Look at all these kids above the line who are exceeding their expectations, okay? These are all the kids that are falling between the cracks here because we immediately prejudged their intelligence, right? We just said, oh, well, they're not capable of this. Let's give them dumbed down information. But it shows that there's an awful lot more people capable of this than we give them credit for. Why? What might cause this? Like, why would IQ not be a perfect predictor of academic achievement? What are some reasons you guys think? See how I'm trying to engagement? What's a reason? Whose fault do you think that is? So you're saying it's because they're not being challenged enough? Okay. What if the student's being challenged enough, they have a high IQ, but they have that attitude? Yeah, cool. Yes. The importance of the teacher, yeah, it's so important, so important. So we have motivation, we have teacher support. Let's get one more. Yeah. The subject. Yeah, okay. Cool, well, all those are excellent. See, we could brainstorm. That's the thing. Even you guys are just showing right now that you're more creative than the last 100 years worth of I'm saying this in the School of Education department, but I'm sure you guys, this department's very creative. But, already you're thinking outside of the box here, right? And I'm really, really proud of you. I'm proud of you guys. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I guess that's what I'm trying to say here. Here's some other factors I've been trying to study in my career so far that affect student achievement and are so crucial to take into account above and beyond IQ. Active learning strategies. Oh, there's a whole hot area. Actually, Albert Bandura. Raise your hand if you've heard of Albert Bandura, who kind of initiated this whole program of active learning. He said, the best learning outcomes don't happen when you're passively sitting there. They happen when you're taking control of your learning outcomes. And researchers have, last 10, 15 years, have studied that students who have these active learning strategies do better in the classroom, even if you control for SAT scores, control for IQ. You can look at their diaries and extract their learning strategies, and you find things like summarizing, like teaching others the material, like highlighting, going to the teacher for extra office hours. All these things matter. Self-control, extremely important in the classroom. Resisting the urge to respond to someone in text message, and listen to that lecture. Grit is like the hot word in education right now. Like, got grit? ? Everyone's talking about that now. Raise your hand if you've heard of Angela Duckworth. Oh, no one's heard of Angela Duckworth? Oh well. So she raise your hand if you've heard of grit. A couple of people. Okay, cool. So I'm educating. This is awesome. I feel like I'm actually saying something that you guys don't already know. This makes me feel good. Angela Duckworth is a researcher at Penn. She does a lot of really cool work on grit and the importance of passion, and she defines it as passion and perseverance for long-term goals. And she finds that it predicts above and beyond IQ. Interest, cultivating interest in the classroom, emotional self-regulation, anxiety, thoughts about regulating your thoughts that can be detrimental to performance. I look at my IQ evaluation report from age 11. I have it, and I looked at it the other day. And the school psychologist kept noting how I was clearly very anxious to be evaluated, and I would keep there's like a spatial blocks exam where you have to fit the things. He said, I noticed that he referred to me as a little Scotty. I don't know why he did that in this report, but I guess it's what my mom called me. I was 11 years old. But he's like, little Scotty keeps trying to, he keeps getting the answer, and then he doubts himself and then does the wrong answer. He's like, I can only count the last one. He's like, this boy is what he said. I guess the language they used then. He's like, I think this boy's intelligence might be higher than what I have to report, but I can't report. I don't know what to do about this. So, that hurts me now, right? Looking back at that report as an adult, right, and being like, oh my gosh, I should have done something. I don't know what I could have done, spoken up or whatever. But the best I can do now is try to show people the importance of reducing anxiety in a testing session, the importance of regulation, self-regulation for all these things. Extremely important stuff. And social support. Feeling like you belong, feel like you have the support structure in the classroom. Really important. Now that's academic achievement. Now not everything in life is about doing well in school. Raise your hand if you care about doing something creative in your lifetime. It's always one person who's like, no. I'm happy being in school the rest of my life. So the question that I'm going to be really engrossed in the rest of my career, because I'm now starting this new post on imagination. I'm moving into a new phase where I'm getting out of moving away from intelligence and I'm moving more into imagination. What does it actually take to create something in this world and to have a personally fulfilling, God forbid, in education we talk about the importance of having a personally meaningful life. We're so interested in standardized test results and PISA results and anything standardized. What about personally meaningful creativity? So what predicts that? Well, recently you've heard of E. Paul Torrance. I just love knowing what you guys know. E. Paul Torrance? Okay, write down this guy's name. If you forgot Henry, whatever his last name is already, don't forget E. Paul Torrance, because he is a legend in the creativity field, created the Torrance tests of creativity, which are still the most widely used creativity tests today. He initiated a longitudinal study in the 50s, and he followed up these kids in 3 different every kid in the elementary school. He followed them up, for about 30 years, and people are still following these kids up 50 years later. He gave them all sorts of tests. He gave them tests of IQ. He looked at their indicators of academic progress. And divergent thinking test scores. He had them come up with imaginative things. And he also did a lot of interviews with these kids. He really wanted to know what are the personality characteristics of these kids. And then we got a chance to look at these kids. They're now old people, and find out, well, the whole life worth lived, what really mattered. What really mattered? Before I show you his list of things that mattered, what do you think was his number one thing that mattered the most? If you predict this, you will win a free copy of this water bottle right here. No, I don't know. You'll win something. I just couldn't think on the spot of what you'll win. Oh, cool. That's on the list, but not number one. Who said that? No. What else? Yeah. I love these answers. Except the self-esteem one. Actually, it turns out self-esteem is overrated. There's research on this that came out in the past 5-10 years by Roy Baumeister and colleagues, kind of showing that it really matters how we praise kids. If we just praise them in a way that is just associated with global self-esteem, like, oh, you're a great person, you did well in that math test, you're great, it's actually not that helpful. It can backfire. But if you praise their effort, that's more helpful. Anyway, just FYI. What else? Who said that? Just curious. No. It's on the list. On the list. No. You ready? You ready for it? Oh, and by the way, you redeemed yourself because that is important. Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. Family support is important, but that's not the number one. So the number one is he found that they looked back at the results. He found that the kids who, at a very young age, mentioned being in love with a future image of themselves, that was the best predictor. The ones who were the dreamers, who had some sort of vision in their head of what they were going to do someday or be someday. It's related to passion, absolutely. But it's not exactly the same thing as just passion. It's this fantasy aspect. At a very young age, he found that was a better predictor of lifelong creative achievement, at least at 30 years, than IQ, than academic progress. He differentiated between the sociometric stars, and that's what he called them. They were the kids rated most likely to succeed in the world in high school, based on their high school performance. And he distinguished the sociometric stars from the beyonders. Those are the kids who actually went above and beyond and were the creative achievers. And in his papers, he has these lists of these are the characteristics that differentiate the sociometric. He found the sociometric stars weren't the ones who reached the highest levels of creative achievement. The beyonders were, and he found all these characteristics that distinguished between the two groups of people. This is just I know you guys like correlations, so raise your hand if you like correlations. I underestimated you guys in your like for correlations. Anyway, at 50 years later, this came out. So we're already 10 years after this, right? So these people are 60 years plus elementary school. They must be like in their 70s, 80s now, right? Something like that. Anyway, and what you find is that 50 years after, IQ just simply has no relationship at all to how they personally achieved, like hobbies and a personal sense of creative accomplishment, or public sense of accomplishment. What still went on strong was this list of beyonder characteristics. The number one most predictive thing was a future image of yourself, or falling in love with a dream is what he called it. But here are the other characteristics that form his checklist, the beyonder checklist. Things like love of work. Like, do you actually love working? Do you love putting in the effort? Persistence. Feeling as though you have some sort of purpose in life. Deep thinking. Do you like to think deeply? Tolerance of mistakes. Openness to change. Risk-taking. And feeling comfortable as a minority of one. He found that kids who checked on the checklist in elementary school, that they're okay being the one kid in the class that has an idea that no one else thinks is smart or good. That's the kid who ended up being the beyonder. Just think about that for a moment, about and how we either reward or punish kids who have minority ideas, right, in the classroom. And after a life, at the end of his life, and based on all of his work, he came up with this manifesto for children, which to this day I think has not been surpassed as just the most spot-on things that we should be instilling in our children. You can get this on Google. You can just get, Google tolerance manifesto for children, put up on your wall if you're a school teacher. Don't be afraid to fall in love with something and pursue it with intensity. Know, understand, take pride in, practice, develop, exploit, and enjoy your greatest strengths. Learn to free yourself from the expectations of others and walk away from the games they impose on you. Isn't that exactly what I did in 9th grade, right? I said, you know what, I don't want to play this game anymore. I want to play by my own rules, and I did. Free yourself to play your own game. Find a teacher or mentor who will help you. Actively seek out that mentor who will believe in you. Actively seek out that person who will teach you those skills necessary to thrive. Learn the skills of interdependence. Don't waste your time trying to be well-rounded. And do what you love and can do well. Okay? Love these. So, how much time do I have left, Glenn Gear?
Yeah, that's 1 minute.
Okay. For the rest of this talk here today, I just want to just lay out 4 tenets. I think just like summarizing the research I've done and stuff, for getting the best out of all children. Okay? We'll go through each one. Some of these tenets sound so obvious, right? Each child's a whole person, well, obviously, like no child is 1/4 of a person, right? But I think that these are things that are really important to reiterate because they often, in subtle ways, get forgotten in the education paradigm we currently live in. So here's the thing. Every single person in this room, what I mean by a whole person is that you're a dynamic system of lots of different processes. Emotional processes, cognitive processes, motivational processes, personality processes, the processes that influence you from your neighborhood, your environment, your parents, your teachers. All of this stuff is actually a system. So any one part of the system cannot be. What I mean by a system is that you can't remove one part of the system in isolation and assume that you can just measure that and study that without the context of looking at the rest of the system. But that's what we do. When we just isolate a variable like IQ and just look at that, or we isolate one variable like low academic performance, we're not realizing that there are so many surrounding factors that need to be viewed in a holistic bird's eye view sort of way. Because all of these components are mutually reinforcing and synergistic in improving student outcomes, right? So if you feel alienated in your classroom, okay, let's say a teacher has said you're learning disabled, and then you're in a regular classroom with most people who aren't learning disabled, you're going to feel a little bit isolated, right? It's the human nature. And what happens when you're isolated? That increases your anxiety. What happens when you're anxious? Well, that's going to lower the cognitive resources you have to put into the task. When you're anxious and alienated, right? Both of those things, combinations, you will be functionally dumber, but not authentically dumber, right? It's not showing what you're really fully capable of, because the more you have all these thoughts of self-conscious thoughts and anxious thoughts, it's taking up lots of space in that working memory system that you need to process the teacher and to do well. The second tenet is that individual differences do exist. This is something I want to be very clear about. Sometimes my research gets misrepresented. I acknowledge that people differ in lots and lots of different ways. They even differ in abilities, and dare I say, talent exists. Okay? I said it. But what does that mean? What is talent? Somebody tell me what talent is. And is it like fully inborn? Yeah. So all talents are developed, is the reality of development. And genes make a contribution. They make a contribution indirectly. They indirectly influence a lot of different things. The pleasure we'll get out of engaging in certain material versus other materials, how quickly we go up that learning curve, and lots of different things. But the fact is that no talents are encoded in our DNA. Okay, that's not how the genetic mechanism works. Michael Jordan didn't pop out of his mother, dunking from the free throw line, right? Sorry for that mental image, but it took many years for him to develop that trait, develop that skill, right? So it's really important to keep that in mind. But here are some sources of variation that really do matter, and people do differ in. Things like fluid intelligence, which is a type of intelligence that allows you to, on the spot, hold lots of information in your head at one time and do abstract reasoning or problem solving on the spot in a quick time frame. You can measure all of these things. Spatial intelligence, some people are really good at mentally rotating objects in their head. Verbal intelligence, Creative intelligence, a huge form of intelligence I think gets not appreciated in our schools. There's a lot of kids who are intellectually gifted, quote, but not creatively gifted, and vice versa. And creatively gifted students are usually the troublemakers. They're usually the kids that we label ADHD. And there's a lot of recent brain research showing overlap between that hyperactive, what's called the default mode brain network, and ADHD, but also creative thought and imagination. So they seem to be linked. The latest research suggests they're linked, which really makes you want to rethink the whole ADHD thing a little bit, right? Emotional intelligence. Raise your hand if you think that we really appreciate compassion in education. Okay. In what ways do we try to cultivate or develop it in our students? I don't think a lot of ways, right? So, but there are lots of students who are going to be the future healers of our world, right? And how are we cultivating them, right? Musical intelligence, artistic intelligence. Okay, so this is not exactly. I know you've heard of Howard Gardner's list of multiple intelligences. I mean, this is my own little list here of different sources of variation. This is not Gardner. Some of these are from Gardner's list, but there are other sources of variation that we can measure. Glenn Gear, in fact, has done a lot of great work on emotional intelligence, right? Your whole background now, you have a book on it, right? Yeah. So we can measure all these things, and it's important to take that into account. Third tenet is that engagement and ability are inseparable throughout human development. A lot of buzzwords in education these days, things like self-directed learning, curiosity, creativity, passion, grit, perseverance, well-being. I think that a lot of these things, maybe all of these things on this list, come as a natural outgrowth of being engaged in something. Okay, so they just like naturally come out. God bless you, from being engaged. I don't know why I did that. So I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth ever. So engagement is anyway, engagement, this is how I define engagement, is an active, deep, and personally meaningful connection between the student and the learning environment. Engagement and ability, I think, are inseparable. They are a constant feedback loop. The more that you develop skills in something, the more excited you are to want to engage in it, because you see a possibility, a purpose for doing it. Also, our interests and passions direct our attention to certain areas of the world, and it causes us to ignore other areas of the world. And it really is that engagement aspect that builds up that expertise base, that what's called deep mastery, that allows us to look brilliant, in something. It's that deep expertise base, and it really is engagement in that learning process. These are a bunch of factors that have been shown to increase student engagement: having appropriate challenges for all students, meeting them wherever they're at, personalization, autonomy, open communication feedback, having a culture in your classroom of risk-taking, culture of tolerance for ambiguity, freedom to question assumptions and express doubts, minimal time pressures. The two that I really like if I had to get rid of everything else on the list, I only had two to foster in education. It would be inspiration and having a high expectations for all children. Now, what do I mean by inspiration? Well, inspiration is something that has been studied in the laboratory very recently, but I find it a fascinating area of research, a very understudied research topic. So inspiration is something that propels us from this feeling of, whatever, to, oh my gosh, there's possibilities for me. It allows us to transcend our ordinary limitations and experiences, and it changes the way that we perceive of our own capacities and what we're capable of. The three main qualities of inspiration: it's spontaneous. It's not something you wake up in the morning and you say, today I'm going to be inspired. You can say that, but it's probably not going to happen. But it's something that you can increase the conditions to make it more likely to spontaneously happen. It's transcendent. You go beyond. Usually people who become inspired for something, they see a greater possibility. They transcend their own, normal concerns and limit about themselves. And also approach motivation. They suddenly become motivated to engage in a future. A lot of creators often refer to being called into the future, right? That's an experience they have, and inspiration usually enables this. They've done research doing before and after pictures of inspiration. You know how they have before and after pictures, like when you go to the gym, you weigh 500 pounds, then you go to the gym, and they do that with inspiration. They have people, kids. They have students like do beepers and they page them different times of the day. Are you inspired right now? Are you inspired? You know, things like that. And you fill out an inspiration questionnaire. They find that these factors were made it most likely directly preceding the moment of inspiration. So if you can foster these things, then make it more likely that during the course of your day you'll be inspired by something. Being open to new experiences, having positive emotions, so reducing the anxieties, having optimism for your future, you know, there we go, sir, self-esteem. He mentioned that earlier. So self-esteem seemed to be important for preceding inspiration. Work mastery, so having a desire, having that attitude to master and learn something and not viewing everything as just a failure experience. Now, what did inspiration buy you? What does it buy you? This is the after picture. Perceived competence in your own abilities, so that increases. Your self-determination in this world increases. The amount of freedom and choices you think you have available to you in life. I can personally attest to all these things once I got out of special education in 9th grade, and I was inspired to do so. I saw an increase in all these things. Absorption, suddenly absorbed in the learning process. Suddenly I cared and wanted to learn. Other major thing is having high expectations for all children. Okay, a very scary statistic. 2004, 84% of the 800 special and general education teachers who were surveyed did not believe that students in special education should be expected to meet the same set of standards as students without disabilities. And that's without even looking at the kid. That's just right out of fact. The kids in the classroom just having that expectation for them. I think that's problematic because low expectations matter. Can you imagine if instead of saying, you know, please feel free to talk anytime you want, raise your hand, let me know what you think. I came in here today and the first thing I said is, you're all stupid. Don't even bother talking. Just listen to me because I'm the man. You know, or says like stupid like that. You know, like, how would you feel? You know, like, would you feel like you want to like even like listen to the rest of my lecture? You know, probably not, right? So the expectations that teachers bring, that's not the only reason why, by the way, that I said feel free to talk anytime. I really do value your opinion. The expectations, why do they matter, right? So teachers with lower expectations, they've done research on this, where they go into the classroom, they look to see students, and despite the teacher's best intentions, there's what's called emotional leakage that happens. It's a horrible term, but basically, I hate that term. But basically, it means that their low expectations come out subtly in so many ways that teachers say, "No, I didn't do it," and you're like, "No, look at the camera, you did it." Okay, so students with lower expectations offer fewer opportunities for their teachers to learn new material. They give insincere praise, right? So they'll know if they know the kids in special education, they'll say, "Oh, it's amazing, Johnny. You got 2 + 2, and you came up with 4. You're a genius." Johnny's smart enough to know that, like, you know, that's just placating him, right? These students are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. They provide less stimulating and lower-level cognitive questions, and they give less effective but time-consuming instructional methods. This matters. You know, all this matters. It becomes a feedback loop. You keep having lower expectations. The kid keeps, you know, showing lower performance, and then it confirms to the teacher exactly what they thought in the beginning. These things matter in the brain. You can see it in the brain. So Kashida and colleagues, they had college students come into the room, and they measured their IQ score alone, and then they put them in a group situation and had them take an IQ test again. But this time, after every single item they solved, it told them their ranking relative to the rest of the people in that room. What do you think? Do you think they showed the same IQ score? They showed a drop in their IQ score performance relative to baseline. It's important because we have their baseline. We know what they're capable of, right? But we're showing that it really lowered having that. So what they found is that while everyone in the group performed worse, those who were labeled as the lower performers, they gave labels to all the students, to all the people as well. They said, "Oh, your performance is really terrible compared to everyone else in this room. You're a low performer." It had the worst effect on them. And it also had significant effects on their brain. They then put them in an fMRI scanner to see before and after, okay? Before and after. And they found that the effect of even just putting them in a group, okay, changed the brain connectivity in areas that brain activations that we know are associated with working memory, being able to hold information in your mind at one time and integrate them, and anxiety, fear. The fear response, the amygdala, showed greater activations. right? So these things have very important effects. Finally, last tenet, potential is a constantly moving target. I have become convinced over my quest the last 15 years to understand the nature of intelligence and potential, is that potential is not something that you're just born with. It's kind of like stamped on your forehead, and we can ever assess it at one moment in time. It's a constantly moving target based on engagement. The more we engage in something, the more our potential, I think, actually grows. The latest research in developmental psychology shows that human development is dynamic, it's nonlinear, and it's probabilistic. These are the three major characteristics of developmental psychology that we know, and has profound implications, I think, on our understanding of human potential. In my opinion, I would like to redefine potential. Obviously, I'm redefining everything today. I'm like, redefining intelligence, but I think it's important from a practical perspective to help kids. If we redefine potential as readiness for engagement at any moment in time, nothing more, nothing less. That's all we consider at any moment during the educational process. Is this student ready to engage in these more advanced resources or more enriched resources? I don't care about your past, I don't care about your future, but are you ready right now, and what can we do to help to get you there? And in my opinion, that's the most practical way we should go about looking at potential. There's too many people now that have surpassed so many odds based on what's predicted based on them. No matter what. How many times do you hear stories about, the 3-foot-tall guy who ended up, like winning the high jump? Okay, maybe I never heard that story, but you hear stories all the time, like Muggsy, but you hear stories of people overcoming insurmountable odds. People who were told when they were really, really young, you know what, you don't have the potential for this. Too many people have overcome these odds that I think it's becoming more of the rule than the exception. And I think that it's fair to say in those instances that they've literally changed their potential through intense dedication and engagement in a training regimen. Okay? By the way, I'm not advocating being unrealistic, right? So if I, let's say I weighed 500 pounds and I said, hey buddy, I'm gonna go and do the Boston Marathon this weekend. What do you think my potential for that is? What would you say as my friend who cares about me? I have a heart attack. I'd die. But what if I, got on the Biggest Loser TV show, right? They're not losers by any stretch of the imagination. These guys and gals, they win. They go through an intense engagement process over 3, 4, 5 years, and they lose so much weight. Actually, isn't it just 1 year? What is the Biggest Loser? Is it a year? This is just an analogy, but it applies. I think this analogy applies to any domain of human functioning. Every single time you hit that gym, every single time you engage in this training regimen, you're rejiggling those odds of your potential. Okay, that number is changing because at the end of the day, potential is nothing but a probabilistic function of a future occurring. That's all potential is, right? And every single time that you're engaging in something, you're changing those odds, right? You're reconfiguring. And let's say I came back to you in 3, 4 years, and I shed 300 pounds, and I'm in the best shape of my life. And I said, dude, I'm going to go to the Boston Marathon this weekend. What do you think my potential is? Would it be different? Your answer, would it be different? It would. So I think potential is a moving target. Feel free to disagree with me. I'd love to hear your opinion, but I think this is a much more hopeful way of thinking about human development than how you traditionally it's conceptualized. So I think it's a myth that geniuses consistently produce great work all the time. In fact, when you look at geniuses, you find that most of them tend to have very uneven output. There's even been a rule that's come up for this called the equal odds rule. It turns out that quality is a linear function of quantity. So the more that you create in life, the more you just keep putting and producing and producing and producing, every single time you're increasing the odds that you're eventually going to have a masterpiece. So don't worry about failing. Don't worry about coming up with horrible stuff, okay? You just need to keep producing. That's the key to the highest levels of creative achievement. So I think, what does this all mean? Well, I think we should encourage children to dream the impossible, think beyond the standard expectations, to dare to be unrealistic. I think this encouragement promotes the importance of perseverance and questioning the established order. And it also instills in people this idea that life is, this might sound a little corny, but life is a journey. Life is like a growth mindset. Everything you do in life is for growth. It's not for, wow, I failed, Unfortunately, we don't have an education system that instills that. We have an education system that makes you feel like if you got an F on a test, you failed at life, right? But imagine if we redesigned the education system in a way where everything was considered just another point in that process. I think it would be a very different education system. I think that's ultimately what enables the highest heights of human creative expression. For the last couple minutes I have here today, what time is it?
It's 6:35.
What time did I start?
At 5:30.
Oh, it's like 2 minutes, 3 minutes? Yeah. Cool. I've been working with this group called the Future Project. This is the website of that group. Just tell you a little bit about what they do, because I think they really put a lot of these ideas into action in a really positive way. So what is the vision? Well, we imagine a world where any student anywhere has the skills necessary to put their dream into action. And what they've done is they've created a new character in a full-time position in the high school that is not your guidance counselor. It's your dream director, okay? So this person is hired to their role is to take every single child's dream seriously in that school and to help them get there no matter what it takes. No matter how big the dream is or how small the dream is, to help them get there no matter what it takes. No prerequisite required. No need to measure your IQ score to see whether or not you're allowed to have a dream or not, okay? It's a very different way of thinking about the educational process. And what they do is if you come to the dream director and you have this dream, what do? Well, they pair you up with a mentor from the community, someone who works with you every single week, once a week, after school, to realize this dream, to really work on this project. And some of these projects have been really incredibly meaningful and in these children's lives, and have really increased their sense of purpose in life. And not everything needs to work out, right, in high school, right? So let's say a kid says, oh, I have a dream of ending world hunger, right? I mean, that child's probably not going to end world hunger, right, Glenn, in 4 years, maybe. But the point is that everything, it's the process, the journey I'm talking about here. Everything a child does that sees incremental progress towards that dream, it transforms everything else about them. It transforms their engagement during the day in school, and transforms their future they see for themselves. A lot of these kids come from low SES schools, ethnic backgrounds where they get written off a lot by a lot of teachers and things. And it completely transforms these kids. And having a dream director in the school transforms the culture of the school, right? So everywhere you walk in these schools, you see posters that say, what inspires you? You know, tell your dream director today. Can you imagine like being in that kind of school, you know, where like everyone was like constantly asking you like, why are you getting up in the morning? You know, things like that. It's really transformative. I'll just show you just a brief video, just to give you a sense of what a dream director role is, and maybe give you some thought if you're a teacher or something, and maybe enacting such a role in your own school.
What does it take to direct a dream? To catch a pie-in-the-sky vision and bring it down to earth. To keep a dreamer's feet on the ground and still remind her always to look up. What does it take to see greatness in what others write off? To look at a near dropout and see the next Walt Disney. A future Rosa Parks in the hallway rebel. To find, in the pair of eyes gazing out the window, the next Galileo. What does it take to shake up a school? To see the one great thing no one has before. In the chipped paint and in the broken lockers. In the cracks and stains that all say this is a place that has really lived. What does it take to inspire a generation? Someone to show students how to stay up late perfecting something no one will ever see. To plan the rally, build the stage, paint the signs, write the speeches, then stand back and watch with pride as they discover it for themselves. What will you do to direct a dream?
William James, who's the founder of the field of psychology, he said way back in 1907, he said, compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. Our fires are damped, our drafts are checked, we're making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources. I think this is no less true today. And I think that one way of really realizing this dream of William James is shifting the culture from a culture of evaluation to a culture of inspiration. Thank you so much.